minus 5, minus 4, minus 3, minus 2, X minus 1. Fire.
Lights out, everybody. The creaking door.
Dimension X.
Inner Sanctum Mystery.
X minus 1.
Dark fantasy.
Hello everyone, welcome to Sci-Fi and Horror, brought to you by Dwayne Old Time Radio. Sci-Fi and Horror features some of the best programs from the golden age of radio, including X-1, Orbiter X, Dimension X, it's a lot of X's, Lights Out, Ray Bradbury, Dark Fantasy, and many, many more. Before we start today's sci-fi and horror thriller, if you enjoy what I'm doing, let me ask you to subscribe to my channel. Subscribing is 100% free, and you will receive notifications on new posts. Lastly, if you have a moment, please write a short 1 or 2 sentence review or give a rating on your preferred podcast service. A positive review or rating would help me out a lot. And now, on to the show. And again, thank you for your support. We're going to end the month with bringing back Bradbury reads Bradbury, 2 episodes. He's going to read Illustrated, and then he's going to read Marionettes Incorporated.
The Illustrated Man, like many of my other stories, is the result of the impact on my life of carnivals and circuses. The Dill Brothers combined sideshows used to come through Waukegan, Illinois when I was 8, 9, 10, 12, 14 years old. I used to hang around and make myself useful, put up the tents, and got to know a man named Mr. Electrico, who sat in an electric chair and had himself electrocuted every night, did wonderful magic tricks, and we used to walk along the shore together, and he'd talk his big philosophies, and I'd talk my even bigger ones to him, and he put up with this 12-year-old boy who was beginning to write. And he introduced me to a lot of dwarves and magicians and high wire walkers and trapeze artists and a lot of people very much like the tattooed man in my story, the Illustrated Man. So I was fascinated with these tattoos, and I met at least 6 or 7 tattooed men during the time between the ages 6 and 12 or 14. And of course, later on, when I began to write short stories, I remembered those tattoos and changed the name to the Illustrated Man and sat down one day and decided to try to do something about such an individual. So this short story is the result of an experiment in recalling those times when I was a child and borrowing one of the tattooed people and putting him in a situation in a carnival and then waiting to see what would happen. And about 3 hours later, this is the story. Hey, the Illustrated Man! A calliope screamed, and Mr. William Philippus Phelps stood, arms folded, high on the summer night platform, a crowd unto himself. He was an entire civilization. In the main country, his chest, the vasties lived, nipple-eyed dragons swirling over his flesh pot, his almost feminine breasts. His navel was the mouth of a slit-eyed monster, an obscene, insucked mouth, toothless as a witch. And there were secret caves where darklings lurked, his armpits adrip with slow subterranean liquors, where the darklings, eyes jealously ablaze, peered out through rank creeper and hanging vine. Mr. William Philippus Phelps leered down from his freak platform with 1,000 peacock eyes. Across the sawdust meadow he saw his wife, Elizabeth, far away, ripping tickets in half, staring at the silver belt buckles of passing men. Mr. William Philippus Phelps' hands were tattooed roses. At the sight of his wife's interest, the roses shriveled as with the passing of sunlight. A year before, when he had led Elizabeth to the marriage bureau to watch her work her name in ink slowly on the form, his skin had been pure and white and clean. He glanced down at himself in sudden horror. Now he was like a great painted canvas shaken in the night wind. How had it happened? Where had it all begun? It had started with the arguments, and then the flesh, and then the pictures. They had fought deep into the summer nights, she like a brass trumpet forever blaring at him. And he had gone out to eat 5,000 steaming hot dogs, 10 million hamburgers, and a forest of green onions, and to drink vast red seas of orange juice. Peppermint candy formed his brontosaur bones, the hamburgers shaped his balloon flesh, and strawberry pop pumped in and out of his heart valve sickeningly until he weighed 300 pounds. William Philippus Phelps, Elizabeth said to him in the 11th month of their marriage, "You're dumb and fat." That was the day the carnival boss handed him the blue envelope. "Sorry, Phelps, you're no good to me with all that gut on you." "Wasn't I always your best tent man, boss?" "Once, not anymore. Now you sit. You don't get the work out." "Let me be your fat man." "I got a fat man. Dime a dozen." The boss eyed him up and down. "Tell you what, though, we ain't had a tattooed man since Gallery Smith died last year." That had been a month ago, 4 short weeks. From someone he had learned of a tattoo artist far out in the rolling Wisconsin country, an old woman, they said, who knew her trade. If he took the dirt road and turned right at the river and then left... He had walked out across a yellow meadow which was crisp from the sun. Red flowers blew and bent in the wind as he walked, and he came to the old shack, which looked as if it had stood in a million rains. Inside the door was a silent bare room, and in the center of the bare room sat an ancient woman. Her eyes were stitched with red rosin thread. Her nose was sealed with black waxed twine. Her ears were sewn, too, as if a darning needle dragonfly had stitched all her senses shut. She sat not moving in the vacant room. Dust lay in a yellow flower all about, unfootprinted in many weeks. If she had moved, it would have shown, but she had not moved. Her hands touched each other like thin, rusted instruments. Her feet were naked and obscene as rain rubbers, and near them sat vials of tattoo milk, red, lightning blue, brown, cat yellow. She was a thing sewn tight into whispers and silence. Only her mouth moved unsewn. "Come in. Sit down. I'm lonely here." He did not obey. "You came for the pictures," she said in a high voice. "I have a picture to show you first." She tapped a blind finger to her thrust-out palm. "See!" she cried. It was a tattoo portrait of William Philippus Phelps. "Me!" he said. Her cry stopped him at the door. "Don't run!" He held to the edges of the door, his back to her. That's me on your hand." "It's been there 50 years." She stroked it like a cat over and over. He turned. "It's an old tattoo." He drew slowly nearer. He edged forward and bent to blink at it. He put out a trembling finger to brush the picture. "Oh, that's impossible. You don't know me. I don't know you. Your eyes, all sewed shut." "I've been waiting for you," she said, "and many people." She displayed her arms and legs like the spindles of an antique chair. "I have pictures on me of people who have already come here to see me. And there are other pictures of other people who are coming to see me in the next 100 years. And you have come." "How do you know it's me? You can't see." "You feel like the lions, the elephants, and the tigers to me. Unbutton your shirt. You need me. Don't be afraid. My needles are as clean as a doctor's fingers. When I've finished with illustrating you, I'll wait for someone else to walk along out here and find me. And some day, 100 summers from now, perhaps, I'll just go lie down in the forest under some white mushrooms. And in the spring, you won't find anything but a small blue cornflower." He began to unbutton his sleeves. "I know the deep past and the clear present and the even deeper future," she whispered. Eyes nodded into blindness, face lifted to this unseen man. "It is on my flesh. I will paint it on yours, too. You will be the only real illustrated man in the universe. I'll give you special pictures you will never forget, pictures of the future on your skin." she pricked him with a needle. He ran back to the carnival that night in a drunken terror and elation. Oh, how quickly the old dust witch had stitched him with color and design. At the end of a long afternoon of being bitten by a silver snake, his body was alive with portraiture. He looked as if he had dropped and been crushed between the steel rollers of a print press, and come out like an incredible rotogravure. He was clothed in a garment of trolls and scarlet dinosaurs. "Look!" he cried to Elizabeth. She glanced up from her cosmetic table as he tore his shirt away. He stood in the naked bulb light of their car trailer, expanding his impossible chest. Here the trembleys, half maiden, half goat, leaping when his biceps flexed. Here the country of lost souls, his chins, in so many accordion pleats of fat. Numerous small scorpions, beetles, and mice were crushed, held, hid, darting into view, vanishing as he raised or lowered his chins. "My God," said Elizabeth, "my husband's a freak." She ran from the trailer, and he was left alone to pose before the mirror. Why had he done it? To have a job, yes, but most of all to cover the fat that had larded itself impossibly over his bones, to hide the fat under a layer of color and fantasy, to hide it from his wife, but most of all from himself. He thought of the old woman's last words. She had needled him 2 special tattoos, one on his chest, another for his back, which she would not let him see. She covered each with cloth and adhesive. "You are not to look at these 2, she had said. "Why?" "Later you may look. The future is in these pictures. You can't look now, or it may spoil them. They are not quite finished. I put ink on your flesh, and the sweat of you forms the rest of the picture, the future, your sweat and your thought." Her empty mouth grinned. "Next Saturday night you may advertise. The big unveiling. Come see the illustrated man unveil his picture. You can make money in that way. You can charge admission to the unveiling, like to an art gallery. Tell them you have a picture that even you never have seen, that nobody has seen yet, the most unusual picture ever painted, almost alive, and it tells the future. Roll the drums and blow the trumpets, and you can stand there and unveil at the big unveiling." "That's a good idea," he said. "But only unveil the picture on your chest," she said. "That is first. You must save the picture on your back under the adhesive for the following week. Understand?" "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing," she said. "If you walk with these pictures on you, I will be repaid with my own satisfaction. I will sit here for the next 2 weeks and think how clever my pictures are, for I make them fit each man himself and what is inside him. Now, walk out of this house and never come back. Goodbye." Hey, the big unveiling! The red signs blew in the night wind. No ordinary tattooed man. This one is illustrated. Greater than Michelangelo. Tonight, admission 10 cents. Now the hour had come. Saturday night, the crowd stirring their animal feet in the hot sawdust. In 1 minute, the carny boss pointed his cardboard megaphone. "In the tent immediately to my rear, we will unveil a mysterious portrait upon the illustrated man's chest. Next Saturday night, the same hour, same location, we'll unveil the picture upon the illustrated man's back. Bring your friends." There was a stuttering roll of drums. Mr. William Philippus Phelps jumped back and vanished. The crowd poured into the tent, and once inside, found him re-established upon another platform, the band brassing out a jig-time melody. He looked for his wife and saw her, lost in the crowd like a stranger, come to watch a freakish thing, a look of contemptuous curiosity upon her face. For, after all, he was her husband, and this was a thing she didn't know about him herself. It gave him a feeling of great height and warmness and light to find himself the center of the jangling universe, the carnival world for one night. Even the other freaks, the skeleton, the seal boy, the yoga, the magician, and the balloon, were scattered through the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, the great moment!" A trumpet flourish, a hum of drumsticks on a tight cowhide. Mr. William Philippus Phelps let his cape fall. Dinosaurs, trolls, and half-women, half-snakes writhed on his skin in the stark light. Ah! murmured the crowd, for surely there had never been a tattooed man like this. The beast eyes seemed to take red fire and blue fire, blinking and twisting. The roses on his fingers seemed to expel a sweet pink bouquet. The Tyrannosaurus Rex reared up along his leg, and the sound of the brass trumpet in the hot tent heavens was a prehistoric cry from the red monster throat. Mr. William Philippus Phelps was a museum jolted to life. Fish swam in seas of electric blue ink. Fountains sparkled under yellow suns. Ancient buildings stood in meadows of harvest wheat. Rockets burned across spaces of muscle and flesh. The slightest inhalation of his breath threatened to make chaos of the entire printed universe. He seemed to fire, the creatures flinching from the flame, drawing back from the great heat of his pride as he expanded under the audience's rapt contemplation. The carny boss laid his fingers to the adhesive. The audience rushed forward, silent in the oven vastness of the night tent. "You ain't seen nothing yet!" cried the carny boss. The adhesive ripped free. There was an instant in which nothing happened, an instant in which the illustrated man thought that the unveiling was a terrible and irrevocable failure. But then the audience gave a low moan. The carny boss drew back, his eyes fixed. Far out at the edge of the crowd, a woman after a moment began to cry, began to sob, and did not stop. Slowly the illustrated man looked down at his naked chest and stomach. The thing that he saw made the roses on his hands discolor and die. All of his creatures seemed to wither, turn inward, shrivel with the arctic coldness that pumped from his heart outward to freeze and destroy them. He stood trembling. His hands floated up to touch that incredible picture which lived, moved, and shivered with life. It was like gazing into a small room, seeing a thing of someone else's life so intimate, so impossible, that one could not believe, and one could not long stand to watch without turning away. It was a picture of his wife, Elizabeth, and himself, and he was killing her. Before the eyes of 1,000 people in a dark tent in the center of a black-forested Wisconsin land, he was killing his wife. His great flowered hands were upon her throat, and her face was turning dark, and he killed her, and did not ever in the next minute stop killing her. It was real. While the crowd watched, she died, and he turned very sick. He was about to fall straight down into the crowd. The tent whirled like a monster batwing, flapping grotesquely. The last thing he heard was a woman sobbing far out on the shore of the silent crowd, and the crying woman was Elizabeth, his wife. In the night, his bed was moist with perspiration. The carnival sounds had melted away, and his wife, in her own bed, was quiet now, too. He fumbled with his chest. The adhesive was smooth. They had made him put it back. He had fainted. When he revived, the carny boss had yelled at him, "Why didn't you say what that picture was like?" "I didn't know. I didn't," said the illustrated man. "Good God," said the boss. "Scared hell out of everyone. Scared hell out of Lizzie. Scared hell out of me. Christ, where'd you get that damn tattoo?" He shuddered. "Apologize to Lizzie now." His wife stood over him. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth," he said, weakly, his eyes closed. "I didn't know." "You did it on purpose," she said, "to scare me. I'm sorry." "Either it goes or I go," she said. "Elizabeth, you heard me. That picture comes off or I quit this show." "Yeah, Phil," said the boss. "That's how it is." "Did you lose money? Did the crowd demand refunds?" "It ain't the money, Phil. For that matter, once the word got around, hundreds of people wanted in. But I'm running a clean show. That tattoo comes off. Was this your idea of a practical joke, Phil?" He turned in the warm bed. No, not a joke, not a joke at all. He had been as terrified as anyone. Not a joke. That little old dust witch, what had she done to him? And how had she done it? Had she put the picture there? No. She had said that the picture was unfinished, and that he himself, with his thoughts and perspiration, would finish it. Well, he had done the job all right. But what, if anything, was the significance? He didn't want to kill anyone. He didn't want to kill Elizabeth. Why should such a silly picture burn here on his flesh in the dark? He crawled his fingers softly, cautiously down to touch the quivering place where the hidden portrait lay. He pressed tight, and the temperature of that spot was enormous. He could almost feel that little evil picture killing and killing and killing all through the night. I don't wish to kill her, he thought insistently, looking over at her bed. And then 5 minutes later he whispered aloud, "Or do I?" "What?" she cried, awake. "Nothing," he said after a pause. "Go to sleep." The man bent forward, a buzzing instrument in his hand. "This costs $5 an inch. Costs more to peel tattoos off than put 'em on." "Okay, jerk the adhesive." The illustrated man obeyed. The skinned man sat back. "Christ! No wonder you want that off. That's ghastly. I don't even want to look at it." He flicked his machine. "Ready? This won't hurt." The carny boss stood in the tent flap watching. After 5 minutes, the skinned man changed the instrument head, cursing. 10 minutes later, he scraped his chair back and scratched his head. Half an hour passed, and he got up, told Mr. William Philippus Phelps to dress, and packed his kit. "Wait a minute," said the carny boss. "You ain't done the job." "And I ain't going to," said the skinned man. "I'm paying good money. What's wrong?" "Nothing, except that damn picture just won't come off. Damn thing must go right down to the bone." "You're crazy. Mister, I'm in business 30 years and never seen a tattoo like this. An inch deep, if it's anything." "But I've got to get it off," cried the illustrated man. The skinned man shook his head. "Only one way to get rid of that." "How?" "Take a knife and cut off your chest. You won't live long, but the picture will be gone. Come back here." But the skinned man walked away. They could hear the big Sunday night crowd waiting. "That's a big crowd," said the illustrated man. "But they ain't going to see what they came to see," said the carny boss. "You ain't going out there, except with the adhesive. Hold still now. I'm curious about this other picture on your back. We might be able to give 'em an unveiling on this one instead." She said it wouldn't be ready for a week or so. The old woman said it would take time to make a pattern. There was a soft ripping as the carny boss pulled aside a flap of white tape on the illustrated man's spine. "What do you see?" gasped Mr. Phelps, bent over. The carny boss replaced the tape. "Buster, as a tattooed man, you're a washout, ain't you? Why'd you let that old dame fix you up this way?" "I didn't know who she was." "She sure cheated you on this one. No design to it. Nothing. No picture at all." "It'll come clear. You wait and see." The boss laughed. "Okay, come on. We'll show the crowd part of you anyway." They walked out into an explosion of brassy music. He stood monstrous in the middle of the night, putting out his hands like a blind man to balance himself in a world now tilted, now rushing, now threatening to spin him over and down into the mirror before which he raised his hands. Upon the flat, dimly lighted tabletop were peroxides, acids, silver razors, and squares of sandpaper. He took each of them in turn. He soaked the vicious tattoo upon his chest. He scraped at it. He worked steadily for an hour. He was aware suddenly that someone stood in the trailer door behind him. It was 3 a.m. There was a faint odor of beer. She had come home from town. He heard her slow breathing. He did not turn. "Elizabeth," he said. "You'd better get rid of it," she said, watching his hands move the sandpaper. She stepped into the trailer. "I didn't want the picture this way," he said. "You did," she said. "You planned it." "I didn't." "I know you," she said. "Oh, I know you hate me." "Well, that's nothing. I hate you. I've hated you for a long time now. Good God, when you started putting on the fat, you think anyone could love you then? I could teach you some things about hate. Why don't you ask me?" "Leave me alone," he said. "In front of that crowd, making a spectacle out of me." "I didn't know what was under the tape." She walked around the table, hands fitted to her hips, talking to the beds, the walls, the table, talking it all out of her. And he thought, or did I know? Who made this picture, me or the witch? Who formed it? How? Do I really want her dead? No, and yet... He watched his wife draw nearer, nearer. He saw the ropey strings of her throat vibrate to her shouting. This and this and this was wrong with him. That and that and that was unspeakable about him. He was a liar, a schemer, a fat, lazy, ugly man, a child. Did he think he could compete with the carny boss of the tent peggers? Did he think he was sylphine and graceful? Did he think he was a framed El Greco, Da Vinci, huh? Michelangelo, my eye. She brayed. She showed her teeth. "Well, you can't scare me into staying with someone I don't want touching me with their slobby paws," she finished triumphantly. "Elizabeth," he said. "Don't Elizabeth me," she shrieked. "I know your plan. You had that picture put on to scare me. You thought I wouldn't dare leave you. Well..." Next Saturday night, the second unveiling, he said, "You'll be proud of me." "Proud? You're silly and pitiful. God, you're like a whale. You ever see a beached whale? I saw one when I was a kid. There it was, and they came and shot it. Some lifeguard shot it. Jesus, a whale." "Elizabeth, I'm leaving, that's all, and getting a divorce." "Don't. And I'm marrying a man, not a fat woman. That's what you are. So much fat on you, there ain't no sex." "You can't leave me," he said. "Just watch." "I love you," he said. "Oh," she said, "go look at your pictures." He reached out. "Keep your hands off," she said. "Elizabeth." "Don't come near, you turn my stomach." "Elizabeth." All the eyes of his body seemed to fire, all the snakes to move, all the monsters to seethe, all the mouths to widen and rage. He moved toward her, not like a man, but a crowd. He felt the great blooded reservoir of orangeade pump through him now, the sluice of cola and rich lemon pop pulse in sickening sweet anger through his wrists, his legs, his heart. All of it, the oceans of mustard and relish, and all the million drinks he had drowned himself in the last year were aboil. His face was the color of a steamed beef, and the pink roses of his hands became those hungry carnivorous flowers, kept long years in tepid jungle, and now let free to find their way on the night air before him. He gathered her to him like a great beast gathering in a struggling animal. It was a frantic gesture of love, quickening and demanding, which, as she struggled, hardened to another thing. She beat and clawed at the picture on his chest. "You've got to love me, Elizabeth." "Let go!" she screamed. She beat at the picture that burned under her fists. She slashed at it with her fingernails. "Oh, Elizabeth," he said, his hands moving up her arms. "I'll scream," she said, seeing his eyes. "Elizabeth," the hands moved up to her shoulders, to her neck. "Don't go away." "Help!" she screamed. The blood ran from the picture on his chest. He put his fingers about her neck and squeezed. She was a calliope cut in mid-shriek. Outside, the grass rustled. There was a sound of running feet. Mr. William Philippus Phelps opened the trailer door and stepped out. They were waiting for him. Skeleton, midget, balloon, yoga, Electra, Popeye, Seal Boy. The freaks, waiting in the middle of the night in the dry grass. He walked toward them. He moved with a feeling that he must get away. These people would understand nothing. They were not thinking people. And because he did not flee, because he only walked, balanced, stunned between the tents, slowly the freaks moved to let him pass. They watched him because their watching guaranteed that he would not escape. He walked out across the black meadow, moths fluttering in his face. He walked steadily as long as he was visible, not knowing where he was going. They watched him go, and then they turned, and all of them shuffled to the silent car trailer together and pushed the door slowly wide. The illustrated man walked steadily in the dry meadows beyond the town. "He went that way!" a faint voice cried. Flashlights bobbled over the hills. There were dim shapes running. Mr. William Philippus Phelps waved to them. He was tired. He wanted only to be found now. He was tired of running away. He waved again. "There he is!" The flashlights changed direction. "Come on, we'll get the bastard!" When it was time, the illustrated man ran again. He was careful to run slowly. He deliberately fell down twice. Looking back, he saw the tent stakes they held in their hands. He ran toward a far crossroads lantern, where all the summer night seemed to gather, merry-go-rounds of fireflies whirling, crickets moving their song toward that light, everything rushing, as if by some midnight attraction, toward that one high-hung lantern, the illustrated man first, the others close at his heels. As he reached the light and passed a few yards under and beyond it, he did not need to look back. On the road ahead in silhouette, he saw the upraised tent stakes sweep violently up, and then down. A minute passed. In the country ravines, the crickets sang. The freaks stood over the sprawled, illustrated man, holding the tent stakes loosely. Finally, they rolled him over on his stomach. Blood ran from his mouth. They ripped the adhesive from his back. They stared down for a long moment at the freshly revealed picture. Someone whispered. Someone else swore softly. The thin man pushed back and walked away and was sick. Another and another of the freaks stared, their mouths trembling, and moved away, leaving the illustrated man on the deserted road, the blood running from his mouth. In the dim light, the unveiled illustration was easily seen. It showed a crowd of freaks bending over a dying fat man on a dark and lonely road, looking at a tattoo on his back which illustrated a crowd of freaks bending over a dying fat man on a lonely road, looking at a tattoo on his back which illustrated a crowd of freaks bending over a dying fat man. I think my story, Marionettes Incorporated, is the result of my growing up with other people's robot stories. I think every science fiction writer worth his salt has at one time or another wanted to try a robot story, a variation on it. And if you go back through the history of science fiction, you'll find each of us at one time or another has done a variation on a particular kind of robot myth or story. And along about 1948 or 49, I finally decided I would like to try something, perhaps a little different, or at least I hoped it would be. So I sat down at the typewriter one day and said, here's going to be my first robot story. And I did a whole series of them after that. And they, I think, improved steadily. I started out with this kind of robot and wound up with a story many years later called I Sing the Body Electric, about an electrical grandmother who embodied all the humanist principles. But this particular story, Marionettes Incorporated, I'm sure you'll discover, is moreover in the shade. It's a little bit more evil around the edges. So here it is. They walked slowly down the street at about 10 in the evening, talking calmly. They were both about 35, both eminently sober. "But why so early?" said Smith. "Because," said Brayling, "your first night out in years, and you go home at 10 o'clock. Nerves, I suppose. What I wonder is how you ever managed it. I've been trying to get you out for 10 years for a quiet drink, and now, on the one night, you insist on turning in early." "Mustn't crowd my luck," said Brayling. "What'd you do? Put sleeping powder in your wife's coffee?" "No, that would be unethical. You'll see soon enough." They turned a corner. "Honestly, Brayling, I hate to say this, but you have been patient with her. You may not admit it to me, but marriage has been awful for you, hasn't it?" "I wouldn't say that." "It's got around anyway, here and there. How she got you to marry her, that time back in 1979 when you were going to Rio." "Dear Rio, I never did see it after all my plans." "And how she tore her clothes and rumpled her hair and threatened to call the police unless you married her. She always was nervous, Smith, understand. It was more than unfair. You didn't love her. You told her as much, didn't you? I recall that I was quite firm on the subject. But you married her anyhow. I had my business to think of, as well as my mother and father. A thing like that would have killed them. And it's been 10 years. "Yes," said Brayling, his gray eyes steady, "but I think perhaps it might change now. I think what I've waited for has come about. Look here." He drew forth a long blue ticket. "Why, it's a ticket for Rio on the Thursday rocket. Yes, I'm finally going to make it. But how wonderful! You do deserve it. But won't she object? Cause trouble?" Brayling smiled nervously. "She won't know I'm gone. I'll be back in a month and no one the wiser except you." Smith sighed. "I wish I were going with you." "Poor Smith. Your marriage hasn't exactly been roses, has it?" "Not exactly. Married to a woman who overdoes it. I mean, after all, when you've been married 10 years, you don't expect a woman to sit on your lap for 2 hours every evening, call you at work 12 times a day, and talk baby talk. And it seems to me that in the last month she's gotten worse. I wonder if perhaps she isn't just a little simple-minded." "Ah, Smith, always the conservative. Well, Here's my house. Now, would you like to know my secret? How I made it out this evening? Will you really tell? Look up there, said Brayling. They both stared up through the dark air. In the window above them, on the second floor, a shade was raised. A man about 35 years old, with a touch of gray at either temple, sad gray eyes, and a small, thin mustache, looked down at them. Why, that's you, cried Smith. Shh, not so loud. Brayling waved upward. The man in the window gestured significantly and vanished. I must be insane, said Smith. Hold on a moment. And they waited. The street door of the apartment opened, and the tall, spare gentleman with the mustache and the grieved eyes came out to meet them. Hello, Brayling, he said. Hello, Brayling, said Brayling. They were identical. Smith stared. Is this your twin brother? I never knew. No, said Brayling quietly. Bend close. Put your ear to Brayling 2's chest. Smith hesitated and then leaned forward to place his head against the uncomplaining ribs. Oh, no, it can't be. It is. Let me listen again. Smith staggered back and fluttered his eyelids, appalled. He reached out and touched the warm hands and cheeks of the thing. Where'd you get him? Isn't he excellently fashioned? Incredible. Where? Give the man your card, Brayling 2. Brayling 2 did a magic trick and produced a white card. Marionettes Incorporated. Duplicate self or friends. New humanoid plastic 1990 models guaranteed against all physical wear. From $7,600 to our $15,000 deluxe model. No, said Smith. Yes, said Brayling. Naturally, said Brayling 2. How long has this gone on? I've had him for a month. I keep him in the cellar in a toolbox. My wife never goes downstairs, and I have the only lock and key to that box. Tonight I said I wish to take a walk to buy a cigar. I went down cellar and took Brayling 2 out of his box and sent him back up to sit with my wife while I came on out to see you, Smith. Wonderful! He even smells like you, Bond Street and Melacrinos. It may be splitting hairs, but I think it highly ethical. After all, what my wife wants most of all is me. This marionette is me to the hairiest detail. I've been home all evening. I shall be home with her for the next month. In the meantime, another gentleman will be in Rio after 10 years of waiting. When I return from Rio, Brayling 2 here will go back in his box. Smith thought that over for a minute or two. Will he walk around without sustenance for a month? He finally asked. For 6 months if necessary, and he's built to do everything, eat, sleep, perspire, everything natural as natural is. You'll take good care of my wife, won't you, Brayling 2? Your wife is rather nice, said Brayling 2. I've grown rather fond of her. Smith was beginning to tremble. How long has Marionettes Incorporated been in business? Secretly, for 2 years. Could is there a possibility? Smith took his friend's elbow earnestly. Can you tell me where I can get one, a robot, a marionette, for myself? You will give me the address, won't you? Here you are. Smith took the card and turned it round and round. Thank you, he said. You don't know what this means. Just a little respite, a night or so, once a month even. My wife loves me so much she can't bear to have me gone an hour. I love her dearly, you know, but remember the old poem, Love will fly if held too lightly, love will die if held too tightly. I just want her to relax her grip a little bit. You're lucky, at least, that your wife loves you. Hate's my problem. Not so easy. Oh, Nettie loves me madly. It will be my task to make her love me comfortably. Good luck to you, Smith. Do drop around while I'm in Rio. It will seem strange if you suddenly stop calling by to my wife. You're to treat Brayling 2 here, just like me. Right. Goodbye, and thank you. Smith went smiling down the street. Brayling and Brayling 2 turned and walked into the apartment hall. On the crosstown bus, Smith whistled softly, turning the white card in his fingers. Clients must be pledged to secrecy, for while an act is pending in Congress to legalize Marionettes Incorporated, it is still a felony if caught to use one. Well, said Smith. Clients must have a mold made of their body and a color index check of their eyes, lips, hair, skin, etc. Clients must expect to wait for 2 months until their model is finished. Not so long, thought Smith. 2 months from now, my ribs will have a chance to mend from the crushing they've taken. 2 months from now, my hand will heal from being so constantly held. 2 months from now, my bruised underlip will begin to reshape itself. I don't mean to sound ungrateful, but... He flipped the card over. Marionettes Incorporated is 2 years old and has a fine record of satisfied customers behind it. Our motto is no strings attached. Address 43 South Wesley Drive. The bus pulled to his stop. He alighted, and while humming up the stairs, he thought, Nettie and I have $15,000 in our joint bank account. I'll just slip $8,000 out as a business venture, you might say. The Marionette will probably pay back my money with interest in many ways. Nettie needn't know. He unlocked the door, and in a minute was in the bedroom. There lay Nettie, pale, huge, and piously asleep. Dear Nettie, he was almost overwhelmed with remorse at her innocent face there in the semi-darkness. If you were awake, you would smother me with kisses and coo in my ear. Really, you make me feel like a criminal. You've been such a good, loving wife. Sometimes it is impossible for me to believe you married me instead of that Bud Chapman you once liked. It seems that in the last month you have loved me more wildly than ever before. Tears came to his eyes. Suddenly he wished to kiss her, confess his love, tear up the card, forget the whole business. But as he moved to do this, his hand ached and his ribs cracked and groaned. He stopped with a pained look in his eyes and turned away. He moved out into the hall and through the dark rooms. Humming, he opened the kidney desk in the library and filched the bank book. Just take $8,000 is all, he said. No more than that. He stopped. Wait a minute. He rechecked the bank book frantically. Hold on here, he cried. $10,000 is missing. He leapt up. There's only $5,000 left. What's she done? What's Nettie done with it? More hats, more clothes, more perfume? Oh, wait, I know. She bought that little house on the Hudson she's been talking about for months without so much as a by your leave. He stormed into the bedroom, righteous and indignant. What did she mean, taking their money like this? He bent over her. Nettie, he shouted. Nettie, wake up. She did not stir. What have you done with my money? He bellowed. She stirred fitfully. The light from the street flushed over her beautiful cheeks. There was something about her. His heart throbbed violently. His tongue dried. He shivered. His knees suddenly turned to water. He collapsed. Nettie, Nettie, he cried. What have you done with my money? And then the horrid thought, and then the terror and the loneliness engulfed him, and then the fever and disillusionment. For, without desiring to do so, he bent forward and yet forward again until his fevered ear was resting firmly and irrevocably upon her round pink bosom. Nettie! He cried. As Smith walked away down the avenue in the night, Brayling and Brayling, too, turned in at the door to the apartment. I'm glad he'll be happy, too, said Brayling. Yes, said Brayling, too, abstractedly. Well, it's a cellar box for you, B2. Brayling guided the other creature's elbow down the stairs to the cellar. That's what I want to talk to you about, said Brayling, too, as they reached the concrete floor and walked across it. The cellar, I don't like it. I don't like that toolbox. I'll try and fix up something more comfortable. Marionettes are made to move, not lie still. How would you like to lie in a box most of the time? Well, you wouldn't like it at all. I keep running. There's no way to shut me off. I'm perfectly alive, and I have feelings. It'll only be a few days now. I'll be off to Rio, and you won't have to stay in the box. You can live upstairs. Brayling, too, gestured irritably. And when you come back from having a good time, back in the box I go. Brayling said, They didn't tell me at the marionette shop that I'd get a difficult specimen. There's a lot they don't know about us, said Brayling, too. We're pretty new, and we're sensitive. I hate the idea of you going off and laughing and lying in the sun in Rio while we're stuck here in the cold. But I've wanted that trip all my life, said Brayling quietly. He squinted his eyes and could see the sea and the mountains and the yellow sand. The sound of the waves was good to his inward mind. The sun was fine on his bared shoulders. The wine was most excellent. "I'll never get to go to Rio," said the other man. "Have you thought of that?" "No, And another thing, your wife. What about her?" asked Brayling, beginning to edge toward the door. "I've grown quite fond of her." "I'm glad you're enjoying your employment." Brayling licked his lips nervously. "I'm afraid you don't understand. I think I'm in love with her." Brayling took another step and froze. "You're what?" "And I've been thinking," said Brayling too, "how nice it is in Rio, and how I'll never get there. And I've thought about your wife, and I think we could be very happy." That's nice." Brayling strolled as casually as he could to the cellar door. You won't mind waiting a moment, will you? I have to make a phone call." "To whom?" Brayling, too, frowned. "No one important." "To Marionettes Incorporated? To tell them to come get me?" "Oh, no, nothing like that." He tried to rush out the door. A metal firm grip seized his wrists. "Don't run." "Take your hands off." "No." "Did my wife put you up to this?" "No." "Did she guess? Did she talk to you? Does she know? Is that it?" He screamed. A hand clapped over his mouth. "You'll never know, will you?" Brayling, too, smiled delicately. "You'll never know." Brayling struggled. "She must have guessed. She must have affected you." Brayling, too, said, "I'm going to put you in the box, lock it, and lose the key. Then I'll buy another Rio ticket for your wife." Now, wait a minute. Hold on. Don't be rash. Let's talk this over." "Goodbye, Brayling." Brayling stiffened. "What do you mean, goodbye?" 10 minutes later, Mrs. Brayling awoke. She put her hand to her cheek. Someone had just kissed it. She shivered and looked up. "Why, you haven't done that in years," she murmured. "We'll see what we can do about that," someone said.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy what I'm doing, I ask you to please subscribe to my channel or channels. Well, hope you enjoyed, and until next time, stay safe, wish you well, peace.